how does economics, that topic, relate to a new age or new thought or a spiritual conference? It seems on the surface to be a bit out of place. But I hope to show you, using economics as an example, how it is all a part of our spiritual life, how it is all a part of our spiritual path, and that through things as mundane, perhaps as economics, we can actually find another pathway to transcendence. Now, I'm not an economist. I never wanted to be one. I actually don't have a great deal of interest in it as a science, if you could call it a science. I mean, even economists themselves refer to it as the dismal science. That doesn't sound really encouraging. You know, it's not something you want to learn about on your spiritual path. But for me, the more I look into it, and I have had a lot of economics coursework in the past, in my younger years, but the way I look at economics now is it's all about values. It's all about how we see ourselves in the world, how we value ourselves, how we value each other, and how we value the material, physical world that we live in, the earth itself, the mother that supports us, supports our physical existence. Through looking at economics as a system of values, we can also look at it in terms of relationships. Because if I'm looking at how I value myself, it also reflects to me my relationship with myself, my inner relationship. And if I think about economics in terms of how I value you, it means how I relate to you. And then, of course, how I relate to the earth. So for me, economics is about values and relationships. I don't much care about our central banks determining interest rates and about balance of trade and international trade. There's a part of me actually that does pay attention to those things. But in terms of a spiritual practice, an economics of values, an economics of relationships represents to me a part of my spiritual practice. It is a way that I can see how I am doing in spiritual terms in the world. I mean, I know how I'm doing when I sit in meditation. I'm pretty clear about where I am in that. But how am I doing in the world? And if I can't answer that question in a positive way, then I know I've got more work to do on myself, more spiritual work. What we can see when we look out into the world is that there's a great deal of imbalance, economic imbalance. There are the few fabulously rich and a huge number of desperately poor, and actually a decreasing number in the last decade of people in between, the middle classes. Their numbers are actually decreasing. So it's pretty obvious that there's a great imbalance in the world. That tells me that in spiritual terms, we are not relating to each other appropriately. There's something wrong. There's something out of kilter there. All we have to do is look at things, phenomena, like the Arab Spring and the repercussions of that are still going on, both in Egypt and other places in North Africa, and certainly in Syria. We could look at the protest marches and riots even in places like Greece and the whole Mediterranean area, here in London and in different cities in the United States, to know that there's something dreadfully amiss. Because when there is economic imbalance, when there are imbalances in how we care for the other people on this planet with us, then there are political repercussions. You know, it may look on the surface like a lot of the problems in the Middle East and elsewhere are religious issues, but at heart, or racial issues, at heart, they're economic. If you just go a little bit under the surface, you can see that there is a great sense of futility, anger, and despair among large segments of various populations of people that feel disenfranchised, that are feeling less than. And that's among those people who are above the starvation level. Of course, people below the starvation level, the ones who are truly withering away, can't even begin to fathom those kinds of political and other questions. They're just trying to stay alive. So there's something terribly amiss here. There are, I would say, 3 spiritual goals that we ought to be, in the macrocosm, that we ought to be looking at when we're undertaking our personal spiritual practice. And one is to narrow the gap between rich and poor nations, rich and poor individuals, rich and poor within our own countries. The other one is to mitigate racial and religious hatred. And as I was just suggesting, that is also economic in nature. And the third one is to look at how we take care of the planet Earth. And much of that is also economic in nature. Because if you look at governments who are arguing whether, in the United States, for example, they ought to sign the Kyoto climate change protocols, and we're saying, oh no, we can't do that because it'll cost too much money and it'll make our economy suffer. Meanwhile, let's let everybody else suffer. So that truly is also an economic issue. So those are 3 goals that I would say are at the heart of all of our overall spiritual paths. I want to give a few definitions here so that we're kind of on the same page. That's so you know where I'm coming from when I use different language. I'm not going to give dictionary definitions. I'm going to try to give you some spiritual definitions. One is money. Money is the consolidation of the loving energy of divinity. The consolidation of the loving energy of divinity. Bet you never heard of money talked about that way. That definition was given by Alice Bailey, who has written 35 books, I don't remember, some really magnificent books, channeling one of the masters. Now we all know that money is energy in motion. Money doesn't exist except that we say it does. It really is the concretization or the digitalization, hard words, of energy. We give it value because we agree it has value, whether it's pounds or dollars or gold or whatever it is. But it's spiritual energy. And like all energy, it is meant to flow. It is not meant to be blocked and hoarded and stopped in different places by different people. Once it's stopped, once it's blocked, that's when you get these imbalances. So money needs to flow. for there to be economic